Well, good afternoon, councillors, the packed house in attendance here today and those who are listening in. In opening today's meeting at 1 p.m, we acknowledge and pay respects to the ongoing and original owners of this unceded land, the Palawa people. Thank you. We do have some apologies here today as well. Councillor Britton, Councillor Professor Raze and Deputy Mayor McKenzie. With no acknowledgements at 2, we'll move to 3 declarations of interest. So a councillor must declare any interest that the councillor has in a matter before any decision on that matter commences. Do we have any declared interests here today? There being none, we'll move forward to the confirmation of minutes. Recommendation that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the City of Launceston Council held on the 7th of March this year be confirmed as a true and correct record. Somebody to move. Councillor Palmer, a seconder. Councillor Dawkins, all of those in favour? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. Moving to agenda item number 6, which is council workshops, 5.1, council workshop reports, the 7th of March till the 14th of March. The recommendation is that council notes that those council workshops were conducted and attended since the last council meeting for these purposes described. Home Point Pontoon, upcoming tender and expressions of interest. East Tamar Tennis Courts, next steps. Tamar Estuary and Esk Rivers Partnership Agreement. Upcoming season and community commitment with the Hawthorn Football Club. We have the presentation, review and discussions. Rolling review of committees and the University of Tasmania Stadium transfer. Somebody to move. Councillor Dawkins, a seconder. Councillor Harris. Councillor Dawkins, would you like to speak to the workshops?
Just briefly, another excellent session. The really important one for me is always going to be the tier partnership and the work of NRM North. That peer-reviewed work, it really gives us that opportunity to understand what we need for our river. And it's so important that we focus on the science when we're making decisions of this nature. Thank you,
Councillor Dawkins. Any further comments from the seconder, Councillor Harris? Around the table? Anything to close? Okay, all those in favour? Is all councillors present? The motion is carried. At agenda item number 6, we don't have any councillors' leave of absence applications as a part of this agenda, but we'll move to community reports at 7, in which we do have a community report today from Amy Lewandowski as a part of the Education and Training Peer Support Coordinator at Epilepsy Tasmania. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you very much, Mia. And thank you all for inviting me to speak to you today. My name's Amy Lewandowski, and good pronunciation. My name's Amy Lewandowski, Education and Training Peer Support Coordinator for Epilepsy Tasmania. I've also been living with epilepsy for 20 years now. Epilepsy Tasmania was formed in 1975. It is a not-for-profit organisation that raises awareness and provides support and understanding to people living with epilepsy, as well as their families and carers. Epilepsy is a spectrum of neurological disorders characterised by recurrent seizures resulting from abnormal electrical activity in the brain. It affects 70 million people worldwide, which equates to 250,000 in Australia and, believe it or not, 20,000 in Tasmania. This means that a fifth of Tasmanians, including families and carers, are affected by epilepsy. The causes of epilepsy are very complex, and there are many known risks such as serious head injuries, strokes, brain infections, and so on. And unfortunately, in 40% of cases, the cause cannot be determined. The World Health Organisation reports that 47% of employed Australians with epilepsy report unfair treatment in the workplace, but the Tasmanian statistic is worse. As it stands, it's 52%. And we do, unfortunately, see a lot of clients who have lost their job due to epilepsy. The most common places of discrimination are at work and in schools. As such, Epilepsy Tasmania in schools is now the third most common health condition. In the last 6 months, Epilepsy Tasmania provided 15 training sessions to schools in order for teachers to be able to be fully trained in understanding and managing epilepsy, individual students' epilepsy management plans, and the administering of emergency medication if and when required. In the disability sector, Epilepsy Tasmania provided 42 training sessions at disability providers in order for support workers to be fully trained in understanding and managing epilepsy, in epilepsy management plans and how to assist their clients, and also the administering of emergency medication if and when required. Training is also provided in workplaces, aged care facilities and for families. People with epilepsy are up to 8 times more likely to have other health conditions such as depression, dementia, heart disease and anxiety. So Epilepsy Tasmania provides comprehensive support appointments with a social worker, nurse or peer support coordinator to assist with all the various ways epilepsy can affect someone's life. In addition, as of 2.5 years ago when I started working with them, we now have peer support across Tasmania, and we're also involved in the national program. This provides people living with and caring for people with epilepsy to all come together, connect and share their experiences to live well with epilepsy. These confidential, safe and supportive conversations can occur in groups, individually, and are offered via phone, online and in person. That is a very small snapshot of what Epilepsy Tasmania does. I was told to keep it 3 minutes and I hope I have. I'd like to thank you all very much for inviting me, and please reach out to us if and when required, and anyone else you come across who may have epilepsy or be recently diagnosed with epilepsy, we are here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you for the advocacy that you're doing there too, yes. Agenda item number 8 is public question time. 8.1, public questions on notice. We'll see at 8.1.1, the Honourable Rosemary Armitage MLC asking around the retaining wall at the top of Howick Street. 8.1.2, Rosslyn Ives, which is the inclinator at the Cataract Gorge. 8.1.3, Tammy King, working with vulnerable people registration for councillors. 8.1.4, Ray Norman greening strategy, as well as at 8.1.5, Ray Norman with Birchells. 8.1.6, Ray Norman with QR codes for site and general information. And 8.1.7, Ross Lewis with the accessible play space. Moving forward to 8.2, public questions without notice, noting that the rules and the meeting regulations are available and displayed upon entry. You may ask a total of 3 questions each. Mr. Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A number of years ago, while working and living in London, I was made aware of a law which prevented large buildings from overshadowing their neighbours. It was called the light angle rule. And while that may not be working now, I'm not sure of this. I wonder why this council won't initiate a similar rule to protect the amenities of its residents and its ratepayers.
Thank you, Mr. Baines. I do believe that that is a part of the assessment with the statewide planning scheme, but I'm happy to find further and take that on notice, some further information around to what protection is in that scheme and the process and protocols around that.
Thank you. What is the budget for the greening Launceston program?
Sure. Having adopted recently the greening strategy, I'm not aware off the top of my head, but I can have a deeper dive and take that one also on notice as to an answer financially as what that might look like.
Thank you. Last one. Given the ongoing climate change problem, will council stop any more building developments in Inveresk?
So with this one as well, Mr Baines, we work with the state planning scheme that does have rules and regulations around flood-prone areas, and we work with the Flood Authority on the advice and each of those development applications as it's assessed individually. So there is the scheme that works with that, and there's the Flood Authority that takes into account those also, and then our officers work with those protocols and legislations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Baines. Further questions without notice?
Could I have the sheet of paper, please, that I handed to a lady on the way? Thank you. My questions concern my name is Noel Christensen. My questions concern the Talbot Road lookout and the fact that it is not fit for use. Could I ask you, please, if the mayor could tell me whether the trees blocking the view and thereby obliterating horizon-to-horizon panoramas from the CBD to infinity, were they put there purposely to hide the view?
I would have to take that on notice as to where and when those trees were planted and where they came from. Noting that they're big enough to block the view, I think that might be a little before my time. So I'll have a little bit of a look into why and where those trees came from. So we might take that one on notice.
Well, may I venture to say that it'd be ludicrous to plant trees at a lookout to obscure the view. So in order to resurrect the effectiveness of the tower built by the council in 1935 and offering what I believe is the equivalent to whatever you can see in Paris from the Eiffel Tower, and in New York City from the Empire State Building, in Sydney from Centrepoint Tower, or from the bow of the RMS Titanic in the movie, if that could be restored and returned to the people, tourists and locals alike, would that be possible?
Oh, we can definitely take that on notice and have a look firsthand once we're on location. I can't speak for it not being there and having assessed it, but there will be some environmental and facets that come into that assessment, but we'll definitely have a look into it for you and take it on notice.
And after seeing some photos in the today's Examiner, would you accept my nomination for a Glover Prize entry next year?
I see what that's in reference to. I'm not part of the selection panel, but look, we'll take that on notice also. Great, thank you. Any further questions without notice? Appreciating the in advance notice for those as well, so thank you to those speakers. We will move forward through to agenda item number 9. Now this is petitions. And if I can just politely ask that if there are those in the gallery here to speak to the petition, with it being a live agenda item in the Planning Authority, if we do our speaking in item 10, not at 9, because 9 is just noting and tabling and accepting the petition, whereas 10 is a discussion around the development itself, if that's okay. That makes sense? So we're just accepting the petition at 9, if it's voted on, and then at 10, we'll look into the actual development itself. Okay, so that being said, 9.1 is the petition from Anne Lade, which is to oppose the planning application at 44 Marin Avenue, Newstead, construction of 12 new dwellings. The recommendation is to receive the petition. Do I have somebody to move? Move receiving of the petition. Councillor Kai, a seconder? Councillor Gibson? Councillor Kai, would you like to speak to it, noting that we will? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Gibson? Any further speakers, noting that it's a live agenda item next? There being none, we'll take it to the vote. All of those in favour of accepting? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. Okay, so we move into Planning Authority now at agenda item number 10, which is, under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority In regard to items included in the agenda, it says 9, but it means 10, Planning Authority. At 10.1, we have 44 Marion Avenue, Newstead, residential construction of 12 dwellings. Before I do get to the officer recommendation, I will open it up to anyone who would like to speak for or against. If you would make your way to the microphone and just state your name and suburb. The floor is yours. Who would like to go first? I do have some noted speakers for. Who have I got on my list? I've got the East Coast Homes, Jason and Steve.
Good afternoon. Jason Van Zetten, I'm the designer of the development. Regarding the petition, we request it's not considered. It doesn't have addresses on it. It's got double ups of names on it, and we don't know where the petition's from or how many of the petition signers are living units themselves. If it had addresses, it'd be a little bit more legible. Thank you.
So this moment is to speak on the development itself, not the petition. So if you wanted to speak for why we should approve. We're not speaking on the petition, we're speaking on the development. If you're speaking for the development, this is your opportunity to sell.
Mr Mayor, if I may just further expand on what you said, that the process for petitions is that council receives, whether or not ultimately they agree or reject to what's been suggested in the petition. It's a formalised process to receive that document. Ordinarily, you consider it at a later date. That won't be the case today because it's a live development application. So, as the Mayor suggested, we're now in the development application, considering it as a normal development application.
So as I have Jason and Steve noted for the development, this is the opportunity to address the council as to why. Okay. Happy to go ahead for? Okay. Do we have anyone to speak further to the development application? There being none, we will move forward to the recommendation. The recommendation is that a permit be granted for residential construction of 12 dwellings at 44 Marion Avenue, Newstead, subject to the following published conditions in the agenda. Do I have somebody to move the recommendation? Councillor Harris to move, a seconder. Councillor Kai to second. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. And just before I start to speak for it, I might ask a few questions if I may.
Okay,
from our planning officers. There's obviously been a lot of concerns raised, and so just to understand first of all about the rubbish and recycling collection, could you expand further on what's been put in place for this particular development, which does have 12 units at the top of a cul-de-sac and therefore a limit to the amount of curbside space for collection?
Council's approach to refuse and recycling is dealt with in condition 9 of the recommended permit, and I can read that out if you like. Prior to the commencement of works, the applicant must provide written evidence of an agreement between the owner and a relevant contractor for the collection of refuse and recycling from the site. The relevant contractor may be the council-appointed contractor for refuse and recycling collection or other contractor engaged in the collection of refuse and or recycling. Collection will not be permitted to occur directly from, and that's a typo, unfortunately. Thank you. Yeah, that is a typo. That would need to be corrected. Right. It does say from Punchbowl Road, which should say from
Marion Avenue.
Marion Avenue, and bins must be located within the property boundary in the areas set aside for collection. So
Thank you. You picked up what I did, that obviously that cut and paste from Punchbowl Road, because I think it'll be a fair distance to try to retrieve them from Punchbowl Road.
Keep going, Councillor Harris.
In regard to the car parking spots, I noticed that there are 28, of which 24 are provided 2 per unit, which is 24, and 4 for visitor spots, but there is a requirement for motorcycle parking. Can that be explained whether when there are 4 guest spots, why there needs to be a motorcycle spot provided as part of the planning scheme?
Just nice and loud too. Nice and loud.
It's unreasonable to provide a motorcycle space for a multiple dwellings. There is enough space for visitor parking spaces on the side, which can be used for visitors if it's discussion to the owners of the property. And each unit has 6 by 6 square meter internal garage. If the owners decided to have a bike, there's enough room in the garage, internal garage, to have a motorcycle space.
Okay, thank you. That makes common sense. The third question is just about the site itself. It's very steep. And as such, concerns have been raised about the fact that the land itself was known as landslip and that there are perhaps some engineering challenges for the developer. However, how does that relate to what we are doing here today as the planning scheme, rather than perhaps what might be a further part of the process where the engineering of it gets developed? Can you explain that to the council, please?
So in terms of the planning scheme and how it deals with landslip, the city has a number of landslip classification bands. This is within the medium landslip classification band. So there is some consideration of landslip. The planning scheme, multiple dwellings in this classification are an acceptable solution, and the risk is deemed acceptable to pass on to the engineer designing the development and the footings. So whilst it's not ignored at the planning stage, it's deemed to comply with the planning scheme, and that is the responsibility of the engineer and ultimately the building surveyor at the time of construction.
Thank you. So in summary, the engineer and building surveyor will be responsible for providing sufficiently robust and engineeringly sound drawings to actually make it not slip down the hill.
Correct. That's an assessment that's done at the building application stage.
Thank you. Just one final thing. I did notice there were some building setbacks within the layout of where some of the buildings might protrude into what's known as the building envelope. Obviously, on a very steep site like this, where a building envelope works on a flat bit of ground, it is much more difficult to stop protrusions outside the building envelope. They are said to be minor. Are you able to put any sort of quantitative amount of what minor might mean so that people can understand what this is actually asking us to approve here today?
We can refer to the diagrams in the attachments, and there is in the planning report, and there are diagrams in the planning report which show the extent of the encroachments. So they are on page 9 of the planning report, and they are in the elevations. They are the portions that are shaded in red, and if you can see, they are small triangular pieces at the extremities of the buildings. So that is on page 9 of the attachments.
Thank you. That's page 9 of 107, I think. So you're saying that the roof pokes out a little bit into the airspace, effectively.
Yeah. Unit 3. The diagrams are self-explanatory, but they are what might be called the parapet areas. There are it's above the envelopes, because they're on sloping sites. They tend to be wedges rather than straight pieces. They seem to be almost trapezoidal wedges down the edge of buildings. Now these are probably in the order of about 1 metre by 1 metre at their biggest extent, and they diminish as they go back into the slope. But in terms of impact, given the location of the buildings and the extent of the encroachments into the envelope, we've assessed that the impact of those as minimal.
Thank you. Probably my final question was just in regard to the traffic generation. Obviously 12 units will create a lot of traffic movements to the end of a cul-de-sac. Did our council produce a report on the effect of those traffic movements based on the terrain, and also the effect on any of the other houses, whether that was considered excessive or not?
As part of the planning application process, it was referred to infrastructure team who looks into the traffic generation, and then with the application, the applicant provided a traffic impact assessment, which both deemed compliant with the traffic and generation code under the planning scheme.
Okay. Now, Councillor Harris.
I was just about to start talking to it.
No. Just before we get to as the mover, there is, I just want to double check with you under condition 9 where you pointed out Punchbowl Road instead of Marion. We're going to move that, but I just need to check with the mover and the seconder that we're okay to proceed with that amendment into the wording.
Happy to move to be Marion Avenue.
Cool. Okay with that, Susie Kai, Councillor?
Thank you. So, to speak now on for the application, I've watched the development of this subdivision since it was the school oval, as I live at Norwood, so I drove past it every day going to work. I always wondered what was going to be built on that very steep part at the top of the hill, just underneath the Punchbowl School. I imagined if they tried to build houses there, the backyards and front yards and a traditional development would have been extremely steep, have to be terraced, and probably, whilst offering great views, would have been rather difficult to access as a single dwelling. So when I saw the plans for this 12 unit development, I was a little bit concerned initially, but on visiting the site and then understanding how the driveway would interact with the site and the other houses around it, I think it's quite a clever development. Certainly the 9 units at the back of the property will get great views. And the views are to the east, and so they won't tend to look on or over each other. By providing multiple levels, it enables them to have a small footprint on the actual on the ground, but have still 2-car garages to enable people to park their cars. So whilst I can understand the concerns of residents who may have bought in that particular area, thinking that it was only going to be single dwellings to be established, there are in fact a number of other multiple dwellings on blocks in the more traditional way of a couple of units on a block. However, this is really in effect at 4,800 metres, probably 6 or 8 blocks. And so to put 12 on them probably just makes a whole lot more sense. And certainly from an access point of view, I think it provides a really good solution to what would have been a very difficult site to come up with somehow to use it. The alternative would be for the land probably to sit there unused, or to have some other houses that might have been built on it over time, but as I said, would have struggled, I think, with the terrain to actually make them houses that you could live in comfortably. So I think this is a clever solution. I'm looking forward to anyone else's comments around the table. I know the community might be upset, but hopefully by my questions that I've asked, that their concerns about the rubbish and recycling collection, the amount of traffic and the car parking, the fact that there are 28 spots with 4 visitor spots, should mean that the effect on the other residents in that street will be minimised. There's obviously going to be an increase in traffic, but there would have been had there been houses there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Before we get to Susie as the seconder, a question from Councillor Dawkins.
Oh, thank you.
Do questions first.
In the original 2009 subdivision, when that was passed, there was a Section 71 agreement for a 15-metre vegetation buffer. As this is now obsolete with the introduction of the Tasmanian planning scheme, what necessity is there now for any vegetation in this particular subdivision?
The planning scheme, the ordinary rules of the general residential will apply to this, and the planning scheme, the statewide planning scheme in the general residential zone doesn't require landowners to plant any specific vegetation. It does have standards about site coverage and other things, which dictate that there is land available for vegetation, but it doesn't mandate you plant anything particular in your garden.
Susie is the seconder. Can you as the seconder? Yes, we can come back to you. We'll go around the table then. Further questions or comments? Questions? Question, Councillor Walker?
Yeah, a few questions, if I may. Thank you, Chair. Is it my understanding that this, when it was originally zoned, was more than one block, that it was at some time adjoined? Is that true?
I don't have a particular date, but there were 3 lots in 44 Moran Avenue. They were consolidated into one lot. Yeah.
So it might be fair to say that, you know, people who did buy in the area would have bought thinking that there were 3 blocks there at the time. No, I don't need you to answer that. I suppose that's a rhetorical question. I'm not sure if you're allowed to ask those or not. When it comes to the site coverage, I know that it works out to be an average of, I think, about 409 square metres per dwelling, but it is a consolidated strata title. So it would appear, and I might have to quote the actual wording because it's something I'm not particularly familiar with, that the driveway itself is included in that assessment. Is that correct? And I'll find the correct wording if you can answer that.
The site coverage as defined by the planning scheme is the total area under roof, including eaves. So in this case, the site is 4,833 square metres, and the total footprint for dwellings is 1,320 square metres, which is a total site coverage of 27.3%. The acceptable solution in the general residential zone is 50%.
Yeah, that's correct. But is it still the case that the actual road access is included in that site measurement? That I'm just trying to find the exact wording, and I think it was in the section where objections are dealt with. Now I'm just trying to find that. I'm just working my way back through our system here, but the
Councillor Walker, as we have other questions, would you like a moment to find those and we move?
Sure, I'll do that, and I'll come back to it. Thank you, Chair.
Cool, that's okay. Councillor Gibson had a question.
Thank you. My question also concerns the Section 71 agreement. Specifically, it references the council initiating the process to terminate the Section 71 agreement, yet the report speaks of the introduction of the statewide planning scheme, saying that the 71 agreement becomes redundant. Can you explain to us what is the process of seeking to have the 71 terminated when there's reference to the overarching planning scheme being the overarching document? Thus, what are you seeking to have terminated if one calls out the other?
The Section 71 agreement was placed on the titles at a time when the planning scheme was very different to what it is today. So it dealt with certain things like bushfire, and it dealt with things like scenic management. They were the drivers, and landslip. They were the drivers of the Section 71. The reason that was placed on was because at the time there was a concern that the planning scheme didn't deal adequately with those things. We are now in a different era, and the statewide planning scheme is in effect. And for example, bushfire is no longer a matter that's dealt with in this context. Landslip is no longer something that is dealt with in this context. And scenic management is not allowed largely to be implemented over general residential land. So the drafting components of the planning scheme have changed. And so the Section 71 conflicts with the objectives of the planning scheme at the moment, which is why we've moved to take it off.
I totally understand that, and that, I guess, is the basis for my question. So for some of the representors, the issue of maintaining the vegetation and maintaining the rear boundary and safeguarding that is one of the issues that they have. For other representors, the issue of earthworks is a significant concern. So two of the issues that in fact were part of the Section 71 agreement, and two of those specific issues, here we are initiating a process to have it removed. I guess my question is that a process, or are we just ticking and flicking a box to say, here's an issue where state government legislation actually outweighs something that's already in place, we're just going to send you a note, request that you update your records? Is that what initiate means? Is there an opportunity for the concerns of the representors to be truly considered in a way that the earthworks and the rear buffer vegetation zone are still things that are valued by them?
I believe we have written to residents on this matter, and I believe a significant majority, without being able to quote the figure, were in favour of its removal, because it does actually prevent the normal development of the blocks for residential purposes, and a lot of the development in there wouldn't be possible if the Section 71 was actually maintained. And so, having bought the block and intending to build a house, most people are in favour of its removal.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for that brief interlude. What I was referring to is the access strip. In response to objections, we reply that dwelling density calculation involves dividing the site area and then in brackets excluding any access strip by the number of dwellings. Since there is no access strip on this site, and then it goes on to justify it, can you tell me what is an access strip?
You'll just bear with me just a second. We'll just have to scroll to the correct bit of the scheme, so I'm not doing it from memory.
I'm just quoting from our list in the actual motion, which is the list of objections that have been summarised by our council officers. This one is issue number 4 and our response number 4.
So an access strip is defined by the planning scheme as a narrow part of an internal lot to provide access to a road. Now, in determining, there is a suggestion that this lot is an internal lot. Now, we don't agree with that, because an internal lot is one that is substantially behind another lot. So that's the definition of internal lot. Now, this has some land that is located behind other lots, but it's not the majority of the site. The majority of the site radiates out from its own frontage at the end of the court bowl. So if you project those lines out, the majority of it has its own frontage. Now, I acknowledge that there is some land behind other lots, but it's the minority of the lot. That means the lot isn't an internal lot, and for that reason, there is no access strip. It has direct frontage to the court bowl.
So then I'm correct in assuming that the road that we would commonly refer to going into the site is being included in calculating the average lot size?
The dwelling density is calculated by the number of dwellings divided by, or the site area divided by the number of dwellings. And that is the density per dwelling. So it's irrespective of where the driveway is, noting that the driveway is not an access strip.
I won't speak to the motion yet. I'll just ask one more question, if I may. So we're saying that an access strip essentially has to go behind another property before it's considered an access strip. In this case, there is no access strip. how do we define what that is that they use? Normally I'd call it a road. It's not an access strip. It's part of a strata. It's part of a strata property. I imagine there's a strata in common over the road, but I'm not sure. How do we define that? And how can a road that's being used by 12 properties be considered part of the overall density of those properties? Are we suggesting that children should play on that road, or you could grow your vegetables on that strip there? Perhaps you could put some grass down. I'm being facetious, I know. How do we decide that that road is included in the entire area when its sole purpose is a road, and anywhere else it would not be included in the density of that block?
I think the common term for a road in a multiple dwelling situation is a driveway. And so it is an internal driveway that serves the development. It's not a road in the sense of a public road or a council maintained road. It's not maintained by a road authority. So I think it might be better termed to be a driveway. In terms of what it's used for, it's quite steep for kicking a footy, but there are unit developments where kids ride their bikes and kick balls on the driveway. You know, it wouldn't be unusual to see that on the internal driveway of a unit development.
Further questions or comments from around the table? Anyone else to speak to the item or questions? Councillor Walker, to speak?
To speak, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the answer to those questions. I can't rise to support this today. I do understand that there are other issues where, you know, compliance is found through acceptable solutions, which we haven't talked about today, and that includes traffic movements to some degree. Also includes the height of some of the buildings. They are all noted by our council officers as having met the acceptable solution. You know, I would certainly contend that when people chose to live there, to build there, with all the other sites on that development, all the other lots, that they would not have been in any way or shape or form expecting what was 3 lots to be turned into 1 lot, and then for that 1 lot to be put in a bunch of units. And of course, the cry of we need accommodation, we need housing comes to mind, and of course we do. But it seems as though as a community we always have to make this decision between housing and amenity. And in this case, the amenity of people who have chosen to live and build there, but the conditions have seemingly changed around them. And now, it's not the end of the world. I'm sure it won't be as bad as some people might imagine it will be, but nonetheless, it does fly close to the wind in terms of its impacts on people's amenity. And that is, in a short, normally quiet street, a really large increase in the traffic movement. And that is also, you know, the actual density of housing in that area. I have nothing against medium density, high density living in appropriate areas. I would love to see in Launceston, in the inner city blocks, medium density living. It would be ideal for Launceston. Developers don't tend to do that though, because there's not as much motivation. Could it be profit? I don't know. To do those types of developments. It might be expensive to develop in the city and to put medium and high density in those areas. Maybe it is easier to put medium density in an area like this, on a block that is otherwise very challenged. I accept that. Probably a block that not many people would choose to build on. So in adding all that up, I accept that on balance, it most likely, if it was appealed, would not be successful. That our planning team have looked at this and on balance feel as though it has met the planning scheme. But I do question whether that's the intent of the planning scheme, that you can end up with a block that's a dwelling on 165 square metres rather than the minimum 350 in a general residential area. That would be the area that I object to this today, and I won't be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Gibson.
Thanks so much. I wonder if, with your approval, I could just reference very quickly the petition, whilst not a planning item. I think it's important because ordinarily petitions have the opportunity to be considered through formal advice and come back to the table. Notwithstanding, in my 12 years, I've never actually seen a petition for that seeks not to approve a development application. So that is new, and I expect that the response would say this matter would be determined under the planning scheme, council acting as planning authority. So thus, the same response would be arrived at should the petition have been received earlier at a meeting subsequent to this. I actually agree with some of the comments that Councillor Walker is making. There is no doubt that there are a number of considerations that are absolutely on the wire with regard to this DA. There are some elements, and whether or not people voted in a certain way with regard to their scenic amenity and the nature of earthworks in the area, voted in a certain way to ensure that development was possible, semicolon, they probably didn't respond that way thinking that it would be possible at the level of intensity that is proposed with this DA. Notwithstanding that, the number of discretions that councillors are asked to consider, in my view, 3 of those are of higher order than the others. Primarily 8.4.2, setback and building envelope, which Councillor Walker has referenced and others have referenced in their questions. 8.4.6, the privacy for all dwellings. And to a lesser degree, C3.5.1 with regard to the traffic generation. All of those are covered in terms of the planning scheme and the officer assessment, and it is in no way me casting any view or thought on where the formal advice has arrived at. But I do think this one is borderline. And I think it's borderline simply because of the intensity, simply because of the impact, and simply because of the terrain and the nature of what is being required. I came in with an open view with regard to what this could look like. We haven't heard from any of the speakers, so for me, I take on board the formal representation process and the effort that those that have contacted council through the formal means. But I also take on board the fact that I do think that there will be an impact that is borderline, and that in those instances we should err on the side of caution, and I won't be supporting it today.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. A question, Councillor Dawkins.
For the benefit of those in the room today, can you explain the process if we were to go vote against the council officer's recommendation today of what the next steps would be?
If the council were to determine not to support the recommendation, we would have to determine on what grounds there was to refuse the development. And if that was successful, we would notify the applicant that the council has refused the development. There would be, in circumstances whether it's approved or refused, there's a right of appeal to either the applicant or the representatives. And should that be exercised, we move to the tribunal to determine it.
Further speakers? Councillor Kai yet? Okay. Councillor Kai?
Thank you for that. I believe that there will be significant impacts to the existing residents. I've noticed that in the planning scheme, it does say that built coverage of no more than 50%, and there is, as you say on there, it's under 30%, but I feel that it's quite misleading. Like, my understanding of a built coverage of no more than 50% is so that there is 50% of land left for private open space, for grass areas, for trees and all that. But with the planning scheme, it doesn't, as Councillor Walker said, it doesn't include the driveways, it doesn't include a lot of areas that can't be used as a private open space, and it doesn't include the deck area, so it's only what is the roof space. So in terms of here saying that the site coverage is only, I think, 23 or 30 something percent there, 27.3%, I just feel like it's quite misleading, because if we look back on private open space to each unit is only 24 square metres, where some of those units are up to 94.1, 86, some smaller ones are 67, but that leaves each property with way less than a quarter of the space left for private open space. And when it comes to discretionary, I guess it's all up for interpretation, and we've got 3 quite big discretionaries here with the setback and the privacy and the traffic and all that, and I feel like I won't be able to support this today. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kai.
Oh.
What?
Did
Yeah.
I do something wrong?
That's all good.
Okay.
Any further speakers? Councillor Pentridge?
Having listened to everything, and I'd like to make a statement. I can't help but disagree with everything that's been said, but what I'm disappointed in is that once again, we the councillors have been put in the position where we have to go beyond what I would have thought was normal or fair, right? I mean, we've got, if we're here to represent the community, we've got quite a large group of people who are objecting to what's going on. Where do we, and why should they leave here today believing that they're being totally ignored and not heard? So on behalf of myself, those people, I'm sorry. On the other hand, I actually know the developer, and I believe that, I don't think that puts me in a biased position, but he's got land, he needs to develop it, and it complies with the rules. So I will be, regrettably, supporting the application, not because I know the developer, but I'm disappointed that I'm in a position where I feel sorry for the 12 objectors. And the reason I'm speaking, maybe somewhere in this day and age, we can, with all the technology we've got, is find a way that we don't have to put ourselves in this position. And a lot of this should have been foresaw a long time ago. As Councillor Harris said, that land was a very steep piece of land. Someone should have put a bit more thought into this a long time ago. So for what it's worth, I'm sorry for the objectors, but I will be supporting it because I think under what we're being told, it complies with the rules, and I think the gentleman who owns, or the people that own the land, have a right to develop.
Councillor Pentridge? Any further speakers around the table? Question? Councillor Gibson?
Could the manager planning further unpack the words complies with the rules, just for clarity? I mean, obviously, it doesn't meet the acceptable standards, so thus it's coming to us via a different pathway, relying on discretion. So I just needed to be unpacked what it complies with the rules might mean, given there are 2 pathways to achieving compliance for a DA.
So when a planning application is being assessed, there's a number of things that need to be done, but one thing is to identify which standards in the planning scheme apply to the development. Now, the standards are in the zones and the codes. They have an objective, which is the thing that needs to be achieved, and they have 2 pathways in which to achieve that objective. One is an acceptable solution, which is a measurable objective criteria, which can normally be measured. And if you comply, that is one way of meeting the criteria. You are through the gate. If you don't meet the acceptable solution, you can rely on a performance assessment. Now, that performance assessment isn't a secondary pathway, it's an alternative pathway. In the performance criteria, it's very important to read the words. It's not an open-ended discretion. You need to read the words, understand the factors that you need to have regard to, and then make a considered judgment about whether the application meets the intent of those words and that performance standard that's being required to be exercised. In the view of the council officers, we believe the development meets those performance standards. But as we've said numerous times, the council have their own view and can bring their own skills and experience to those judgments. It is a subjective view. We have made a recommendation, but it is essentially a subjective view based on the words and the criteria of that standard.
Thank you, Richard. Further speakers around the table? Another question, Councillor Walker?
Certainly more questions in terms of the access. I mean, I look at the map and I think, well, this property, compared to its size, 4,000 odd square metres, there's a lot in front of it called Lot 2, which does make most of the block internal. The actual amount of the block that faces or connects to the road is extremely small. It's, perhaps 20 metres where it adjoins the road. But nonetheless, what I want to ask is, we listed as 44 Marion. On the list, the government website, it lists it as 27 Marion. And then you have the block in front of it, which is listed as Lot 2 Marion Avenue. Can I just get some clarity around, is Lot 2 part of the strata, or is it a separate lot? It's listed as it appears to be a separate lot. So I suppose, that does potentially add weight to the idea that it is an access road, if you like. It's a,
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question.
Beg your pardon?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question.
My question is, we listed as 44 Marion. On the government website, it's listed as 29 Marion, 27 Marion, I should say. And I'm just wondering what its correct address is. And indeed, its access to the road, its direct access to the road, is around about maybe a 20-metre boundary. I'm just wondering who decides whether that considers that this, you gave the definition of this access road being one which allows you to access a rear block. Who decides the definition of what a rear block is? In this case, you've got a 4,000 square metre block with a 20-metre wide access, which is not much wider than a double driveway.
The simple answer to who interprets what whether it's an internal block, the simple answer is that's a judgment call that we've made as planning officers, because we've taken the view that at the end of, I know this is a Y head, but at the end of cul-de-sacs, generally speaking, the lots radiate out from the, they have narrower frontages and they get wider as they go away from the frontage. So if you actually draw lines from the frontage following the boundaries towards the extremities of the block, the ratio of that has a frontage and that doesn't have a frontage is in favour of that has a frontage. Now, if we go back to the definition of an internal block being land primarily behind another block, that isn't the case in this case. There is land that is behind other blocks, but it is not the majority of land. And so just a simple assessment and a simple measure has informed our view on that. So it's just a simple measure of how much of it lies behind other blocks. and that's how we formed our view.
Any further speakers or questions? Councillor Harris is the mover.
Thank you, and thank you to my fellow councillors for their considered questions and well thought out. I think at the end of the day, the approval of this would stand scrutiny should it end up in front of the Planning Approval Board. I think they would approve it. And so I fear there is, while some people might think we should be not approving it, I respect their decision to say that and to vote that way. But in my opinion, and perhaps the opinion of the planners, this is a development that meets the planning scheme pretty well. There are 5 standards requiring discretion, and of those, whilst obviously setback and privacy are issues that are very important, their indiscretions are very minor. They are just poking out into the airspace, and that is a consequence of it being a steep site. The pedestrian access hasn't been mentioned, but the pedestrian access will in fact be via the driveway, and so that also is one of the 5 planning discretions. But having lived on an internal battle axe block, as they are known, where you would have an access, this block does not represent what I lived on, which was something with a very long driveway that was only the width of my car wide, and then the land opened up beyond it, in behind 2 houses, in fact. So to me, this does not look like a battle axe block in any shape or form. Therefore, the way that's being developed is probably the only real way to get a number of developments on there, because it's clearly going to be a high cost to develop. The engineering required to stop this from slipping down the hill will require extensive foundations, as others have pointed out in their letters to us. And as such, you'll need to get a good price for it. Now, the good thing is that this will provide 12 new homes in Launceston when we do need new homes. And I've been saying for the last 5 years that the longer we are here, the more we are going to see these developments on the bits of land that are hard to develop, because there are simply no more easy bits of land to develop, or if they are further from the city. And this is a development at Newstead, which is, about 3 to 4 kilometres from the city. And I'm sure it will be a good development. And over time, because of the hill behind it, neighbours will just get used to that's the view up there. And having said that, the neighbours, those who do live up in the new development, will tend to look at the view in the distance, which is to the mountains, and rarely see what is beneath them. So from their privacy point of view, whilst it's understandable, I think in reality it will not become such an issue. So I do ask all of my fellow councillors to support the motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. So putting it to the vote, noting the Condition 9 amendment from Punchbowl Road to Marion Avenue. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Noting in the agenda at 10.2, this agenda item has been withdrawn from the active agenda from today. So we'll move through to 11. Council no longer sits as planning authority. Announcements by the Mayor at 11, 11.1. They're all published in the publicly available agenda. So we'll move to 12. Councillors' reports. Who would like to start? Councillor Kai?
Thank you, Mayor. On Friday, the 8th of March, Councillor Harris and myself attended the QB Mag International Women's Day celebration at Everest Museum. It was a special morning tea to review the progressive artwork project that members of the community had helped put together over a 2 weeks of workshop. Thanks to 6 artists who led the workshop sessions and Auntie Vicky West's workshop series called Immersed in Country, where we learned to dye silk scarves. And all those who attended those silk scarf workshops got to keep their silk scarf. Now, QV Mag Public Programs Officer Carmen Sita, who led the project, commented, "What an amazing opportunity to gather people, our community. What an amazing community and energy, the sense of connection that these women express. We need more of it. We need things that are real." And I couldn't agree more. Now, this week, we celebrate Harmony Week with lots of community engagement in the Civic Square, with activities including a World Street Eats, outdoor multicultural story, international flag walk, Nepali dancing, and a lot more, many, many more. Tomorrow, I'll be joining the MRC North for their Harmony Week morning tea to celebrate the diversity that brings this community together. And I'd like to just finish off by saying what an incredible, inclusive city we live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kai. Further councillor reports? Councillor McMahon, then Councillor Harris.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I attended the Chamber of Commerce Spirit Super Business Excellence Awards on the weekend, where local businesses were showcased and awarded for the work they do and the contributions they make to our community. And I'd just like to make note of Bubble Tasmania, who took up Business of the Year and also winning the award for excellence in education and training, and founder Dr. Natasha Vavrick also taking out Young Professional of the Year. And I'd personally like to thank all the finalists and all the businesses we have in our city for the work they do and for the invaluable contribution they make to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor Harris.
Yes, I also attended the same business awards along with Councillor Palmer as well. And so it was a great night, and it does always showcase the quality of of Launceston's businesses, and particularly those in the smaller end of the market. Also, during the week, I attended the official launch of the Australian Forest and Wood Innovation Centre out at Brooks Road at the University of Tasmania in Unum. Now, this is the sustainable architecture building that had been long talked about for more than a decade, that has been brought about to finally being opened. So this, in fact, is a research centre for all forest industries Australia-wide. There were many universities, mainland universities represented there, who would also be sending their researchers and their research they might do on their own, in their own properties on the mainland, to this one centre in Launceston. So it is, in fact, a great potential for Launceston to be the research for the forestry and wood innovations area of the I guess, the forestry industry. The other thing I attended was Launceston Central had a business event where they were talking about enlivening the city, the nighttime economy, and they had a visiting speaker from the US, whose name has escaped me and I can't find it in my records, but he was very complimentary to the businesses of Launceston. He said as soon as he walked into any of the shops, he was immediately welcomed and felt very welcome as a visitor. And I think that's something that all of us should remember. You never know who that person is that's walking in, and whether they're walking into your business or you're just walking down the street, or in fact, if you're one of our staff, you might be writing parking tickets. You can always offer a smile to someone and see if you can offer them help if they're looking a bit lost. So it was always great to remind us of that, and certainly he was very complimentary about Launceston's business district as such, and he thought it had a very bright future compared to what has tended to happen in the US, which has seen cities of this size have their business district hollowed out, buildings flattened, turned into car parks for large multinational type stores, and that's all. And so we should ensure that we work to hang on to what we've really got and make it even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. And I do note that you mentioned that you attended, speaking of forestry, the Panama Festival that was recently held, an event that Council does sponsor through their small sponsorship grants in the Panama Valley east of Lilydale. I note also Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Dawkins were in attendance. I myself volunteer there and do the bin recycling job. Of course, the festival has long tried to follow a zero waste policy. This year they actually included organic waste, and which they have composted on site. So maybe we'll see some of the produce of that next year, which is a good idea. The difficulty, of course, with recycling at the moment is that in paper food packaging, unfortunately, there is PFAS. It has become, the bane of wanting to recycle and have biodegradable products and the like. You cannot put these any longer in your compost because you don't want to end up with PFAS in your food. And this is something that once you get in, is hard to get out. And it's an absolute travesty. I suppose I would encourage, the council, as we have our sustainability policies, to look and to see what kind of assistance we can give the community, maybe festivals or businesses. It's almost to the point where we might have to consider going back to Tupperware, something that's made of plastic that lasts for 1,000 washes and can be recycled at the end of that with extreme minimal damage to the environment. That's the position we find ourselves in at the moment. So, excuse the pun, food for thought for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any further councillor reports? Councillor Gibson.
Thanks so much. Following those that have spoken about the Chamber of Commerce Awards, I think it's appropriate to reference from a council perspective the outstanding role that William Cassidy fulfilled in that role. Inheriting that role, winning that role in really challenging circumstances after the death of the former CEO, Will did an incredible job. And I know during COVID, the way that he was able to support businesses, enterprise in the city, work with the council to provide a steady solution-based response to COVID from our municipality's perspective. He worked really closely and hard with our council. So we wish him all the best at St Luke's, and we thank him for the work that he has undertaken on behalf of the business community, because it was a great innings in that role, a different personality who really built a membership focus. No doubt a challenging board to work with, I would have thought, but he navigated that brilliantly and should be very proud.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Any further councillor reports? Moving through to questions by councillors at 13. 13.1. We have, going through here, 13.1.1. Councillor Palmer's question re the Albert Hall update. 13.1.2. Councillor Palmer update on recruitment of Youth Development Officer. 13.2 is questions without notice. Councillors' questions without notice. Do we have any questions without notice? There being none, we'll move through to agenda item 14, Organisational Services Network. 14.1 is the City of Launceston Annual Plan 23-24, Progress Against Annual Plan, Actions for Period Ending the 31st of December. The recommendation is to note the progress against the Council's 23-24 Annual Plan for that period stated. Somebody to move the recommendation. Councillor Harris, a seconder. Councillor Kai? Councillor Harris, would you like to speak?
Just to say thank you to the staff who've been working on putting this summary together of where we're at. It is interesting to look through each of the many, many areas of focus that the council is operating in and the progress being made towards completing. And just one of the first ones that I came across which jumps out at me was the regional sports facility assessment of what's needed in Launceston. That produced some surprising results to many people to show that we in fact have too many tennis courts, too many bowls clubs, but we don't have enough AFL grounds and other infrastructure such as that. So it is quite worthwhile. The action now is to then take that and move forward. And of course, another item is in fact the NTCA plan, which it shows that, you know, what we're planning to do with the NTCA, but we're only 25% through that. And clearly getting funding for that will be a key issue for us to progress that much further, or funding promises. But nevertheless, I think it's great to have this update, and I do thank the council staff for bringing all this together.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Kai is the seconder.
I'd just like to thank the staff for putting all this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kai. A question, Councillor Dawkins.
I hope this is the right format to ask this question. So when Councillor McMahon and I brought the child sexual abuse prevention strategy in last September, so that hasn't made it onto the annual plan yet, would we be expecting to see a percentage in the next plan? Is that how this works?
General Manager.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's sitting as a notice of motion for officers to action, so that the notices of motion don't form part of our annual plan actions in a formal sense. But yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Gibson.
I was surprised to see that the engagement with regard to international opportunities was sitting at 50% with regard to the CEO's network, and particularly with regard to alignment of our sister city relationships. We've been trying very hard over the last, I think, 6 years to have a way forward with our sister city committees to meet and to determine what their role is. So I note, subsequent to this process, that there's a review of our committees being undertaken. I note that the Sister Cities Committee is not part of that review formally. In the email that accompanied it, it had the potential to sit outside that. Correct me if I'm wrong when I've finished. But I would suggest that in order, first of all, to be able to determine what the level of engagement and work there is, we first need to see that committee meet, to have it resourced with appropriate officers who can actually help us decide as a council if we want to follow up with our sister city committees, our sister cities, then that will feed into the work of the review. So I note we've only got an acting CEO at the moment who's probably inherited the mark of 50%, but I think I'd like to put an asterisk on that, and for us to go back and to align that with our reviews of committees, and for us to sit down once and for all and to determine what our sister city approach is to be.
Confirmation, General Manager, that the Sister Cities Committee is a part of the review?
Yeah, it totally is.
It is?
Yeah, totally.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? Councillor Walker?
Likewise, thank you, Chair. I did note that Aboriginal Partnership Plan is something that's, probably important to me, important to everyone, no doubt. It's, somewhat lumped together with other community engagement activities that we take in the report, which is sitting at 50%. I suppose, I did consider not accepting this report today, but only because we've been here before, time and time again, and we look at the percentages and we, think, oh, okay, that, and I'm not, it's no criticism of anyone. We have a lot of policies, we have a lot of programs that council staff are working through. We also have an interim CEO. We are in a process of change at the moment, and I accept all that. So it's no criticism of anyone, but this is a public reporting document, and what I see is, sometimes a stalling of a number next to a policy or an action, with no particular explanation beyond the fact that the number is there, and it is a public-facing document. So in that case, if things aren't progressing, then we need to explain why that is happening. If things are, that's great, but it's part of the challenge for all of us in a larger, complex organisation where I think we're all, very well aware of the amount of policies and the limitations of the organisation. But perhaps we do need to get better at acknowledging that in this process, I suppose. So I do rise to support receiving the report. That's fantastic. I just think there has to be increased communication in those areas where we are looking to see results, and if not, why not? In terms of an Aboriginal partnership plan, I note that we are working towards internal cultural awareness, which is fantastic. But I also, not just the way that I envisage it, but I'm sure the way it is intended, that this is a partnership between the Aboriginal community and council. And so, I do expect to see far more in the way of that interaction in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. General Manager Louise.
No, that's okay. Just an observation, if I might. Thank you for your comments, Councillor Walker. We'll continue to work on making sure that there is more granularity in our reporting. We've tried this time round to build in a bit more information about individual items. It is a work in progress, and next financial year particularly, you'll see some business metrics built in so that we're clearer with the community holistically about the volume of work that we're doing beyond our defined annual plan actions as well.
And thank you for that response.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you. My question concerns the community and place network, specifically the revision of the event strategy. So I'm just trying to get my head around, obviously the domain of strategy is that of the elected representatives. It basically tells us what the new strategy is going to be. It tells us that the draft strategy is built around 3 themes. It tells us about the draft strategy will be presented to councillors, and the draft strategy sits alongside the work of Business Events Tasmania and a new focus. So we haven't seen the draft strategy. We haven't even heard about the way to arriving at the draft strategy. We've heard that it's on a task list for a number of months. So from a process perspective, how is it that the focus of the new strategy is incorporated into this plan before the owners of the strategy have had a chance to see what's in it and how it will work?
Acting CEO.
Look, I hear your concerns and understand them and don't disagree. It is on a workshop in coming months, and essentially the workshop is the start of the strategy work, certainly not the end of it.
Thank you, and I certainly appreciate that and the work that's being undertaken. I guess the question is, where it says, and I quote, the event strategy is taking shape, do you wish to change those words?
My understanding is there is no strategy taking shape currently until we start a discussion with elected members.
Further comments or question around the table? Councillor Harris to close.
Only to say thank you to my fellow councillors for their comments. I also note that the Taswater NRM North $129 million River Health Action Plan is shown as 50%. So we do look forward to the day that perhaps that work has been completed. It will make a significant difference to the amount of overflow or other that occurs from our tea tree blend sewage treatment plant into the Tamar estuary. So it is good to see that progress is being made, and I look forward to it being 100%. Interestingly, there's 41 items on there and only 1 has been completed and 1 not started. The other 39 are all part of that process that they're underway, but not yet completed. So for that, I'll say we should all accept this report as is presented.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Taking it to the vote then, all of those in favour? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. 14.2, we are looking at the 23-24 budget amendments. So the recommendation here is that Council notes that during the period 1st of February to 29th of February 24, A, the operating surplus remains at $30,551,292, including capital grants of $18.5 million for 23-24. B, the capital budget remains at $43,308,195, 23-24. Somebody to move. Somebody to move the recommendation? Councillor Kai? A seconder? Councillor Walker? Councillor Kai, would you like to speak to the budget amendments? Okay. What about you, Councillor Walker? Yes?
Yeah, I fear that nobody's looked at these amendments closely enough yet to speak to these. And look, of course, we'll always say that these are ongoing adjustments that are made when different priorities come before council staff seeking to acquit various programs that the council's undertaking. I do note the major plant replacement purchase there as a $50,000 increase. Now, I don't know what major plant replacement that is, so I was going to ask the question, if anyone can answer that question. Is it to do with QV Mag? It is. Thank you. If anyone wants to just explain that one, an extra $50,000 there. It seems like a lot of money to begin with, 2.2 million, but nonetheless, we'll find out.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
The major plant equipment related to a purchase of a new electric forklift and work platforms for QV Mag.
Thank you.
And so in that case, obviously, a good example of what we mean there, and that's all included there for people to see. I note some tiling of York Street West toilet car park as well. I only hope that wasn't as a result of vandalism, but I may or may not be right there.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any further questions, comments? Councillor Gibson?
Look, I always have to put in a point about the Jubilee Fountain when the opportunity exists, and it is wonderful to see some additional funding. We'll be heading in the way of the much-loved Jubilee Fountain in City Park, not only the pride of locals, but indeed visitors. And I think one of the most highly rated social media posts that the city saw in a specific time, such was the interest or perhaps the passion of Mr. Farquhar Still when he was talking about the restoration of the fountain. But we do look forward to that project, which has required lots of plans, lots of work, lots of negotiation being undertaken. So some additional funds there from the City Park fence project will be welcomed, no doubt.
Thank you. Anything to close, Councillor Kai? Okay, putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. Moving to 14.3, the financial report to council as of the 31st of January 24. Recommendation is that council receives the operational and capital finance report for the period ended 31st of January 24, noting the operational report discloses an underlying surplus of 0.053 mil as compared to the budget underlying deficit of 6.45 mil, comprising of 3.14 mil favourable revenue variance and a 3.68 mil favourable expenditure variance. Moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, just this is the financial report at the end of January. We're in a better financial position than we were expected to be, to the tune of 6.45 million, which is quite good, until you look at the fact that we've underspent on our labour to the tune of 3.68 million. So that means that council, along with many other businesses in Launceston, are struggling to get the right people in the jobs. So that is something that continues to affect not only this council, but other councillors in the area, but also other businesses as well, getting good staff. The good part, I guess, is the increase in revenue. I'm not quite sure where 3.14 in revenue came from. I guess it could be our increased in fees or otherwise, or is it
Councillor
some
Harris?
other perhaps?
Yeah, we can go to our finance. Sam Kemp.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a breakdown of the variances below. The revenue variance made up by quite a few factors, but some of the main ones are rates income from favourable growth throughout the municipality. Fees and charges up by almost $1 million. Statutory fees and charges as well. Parking infringements in some areas are above budget. And trading income from the QV Mag bookshop and York Park major events are all above budget.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, that was all.
Councillor Dawkins is the seconder.
Really nothing much further to add, except that I hope that the favourable variance from Carville isn't because we've lost more community members, because that's not a great way to make more money, let's face it. But seeing that the York Park events have been favourable, I mean, that's quite controversial for us right now, isn't it? So interesting to note, and it'd be interesting to see that in a trend, I think.
Councillor Gibson.
Thanks. I was going to stand to say I really appreciated the inclusion of all of the detail. I wasn't sure if that was a new thing, but I certainly appreciated it with regard to the narrations for where the changes came about. So thanks to Councillor Harris also for highlighting that. I think it's really good to be able to just see, and the narration really helps us. Also, the narration with regard to the change in accounting practice helps us who are non-accountants to understand the methodology and to note where we're travelling and to appreciate that should be taken in the lens of the whole complex workings of the finances in the organisation.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Further comments around the table or around? Councillor Harris, anything to close? Nothing further to close? Putting it to the vote then. All of those in favour? That's all councillors present. The motion is carried at 16. We look to the next council meeting as we close at 15, which will be on the 4th of April.